Welcome to Uncover the Human, where every conversation revolves around enhancing all the connections in our lives.
Whether that's with our families, co-workers, or even ourselves.
When we can be our authentic selves, magic happens. This is Alex Cullimore.
And this is Christina Amigoni.
Let's dive in. Welcome back to this episode of Uncover the Human. Today, it's a host day. It's Christina and I talking about one thing that's very just near and dear to our hearts because it happens all the time and always there's just a lot of easy ways to miss the mark on this one, but thinking about designing and implementing human-based policies and incentives. So thinking about actually, things that make sense for people when trying to create structures and rules that govern large bodies of people.
Sorry, I'm completely distracted by the fact that you didn't say just hosts, which is very
you
impressive.
were waiting for me to say it.
Which is very impressive.
I almost said it.
And almost completely distracted by the fact that a friend of mine commented on one of our posts on LinkedIn where we talk about here's the 3 words that we avoid saying, and just is one of them. And she says, like, oh, what's your opinion on only? And I'm like, I would say only goes into the same category as just. Use it wisely and make sure it's not used in a way of demeaning or undermining or undervaluing the actual full picture of something.
Yes, it's very easy to use only in like, oh, we're only changing this department. It's the same as just this department or just this thing or just this one. We're just doing it this week. It's only for 1 week.
Yes.
Use it sparingly or use it very deliberately.
Exactly. So now that we're completely off track, what were we talking about? Oh, human incentives and policies.
Yeah.
Like so you only get 5 sick days in a year.
Yes. And I was just talking to a friend of mine who was talking about their corporate bereavement policy because unfortunately they had multiple losses in their family within like a month. But the bereavement policy is, like 5 days in a year. I mean, that's the kind of thing that like, what happens if you have a deeply unlucky year that happens to fall in the same calendar year? What happens when you do? Is that really a reasonable expectation? Now, I'm not sure that a lot of companies, I would hope, would really like stand by that so firmly that they'd, be upset if you used more bereavement days. It's just insane to think about things like that. Sick days, you're likely, I would hope, just for your own, health and well-being, not going to get sick for more than 5 days in a year. That to the point where it's just not worth getting up, and it's not going to be helpful to you or to anybody that you're working with. But what if you do? What if you end up with some kind of long-term? Yes, there's long-term, there's leaves, there's whatever else, but is it really helpful to designate that you get 5 sick days?
Yeah. I actually remember when I started my corporate career in New York 20 some years ago, that we used to have, it was let me make sure I say this correctly. For corporate, for the standard corporate America, it was I learned later on, it was a very generous PTO and sick day policy. Coming from Europe, I thought it was abysmal. And so it was a culture shock when I actually learned that this was one of the best time off policies out there, because I had no idea how bad it could actually be until I got other jobs, and then I learned. But I remember when at some point they actually, the company I was working for had, again, from US standards, a generous PTO policy, plus a number of 6 days. And I think it were around 5. Fine, sounds about right. And also as a company, they closed all of, the whole company would shut down for a week or 10 days or so between Christmas and New Year's, about a week between Christmas and New Year's. So that was kind of an additional, like everybody's off. So that's your time off. And I remember when, after maybe the first year I was there, they decided to not have to distinguish. It was more work to have to distinguish between sick days and PTO days. And so it was became like a large pool. And so now you take whatever days you need for whatever reason you need. And you don't have to worry about like, oh, I only have 6 days and I got the flu and I used 3 in January and now I can't get sick. But psychologically, it helped a lot because it was no longer this, oh, is this, do I count a sick day? Or, if I want to go on vacation and I only have 7 days left, can I count 2 sick days to allow me to fly in and out, or all of that complication?
Yeah. And there's no way I mean, there's no reason not to use the sick days. We've used the example before. We had friends who worked at Dish, which is a major employer out in Colorado. At one point, they instituted they wanted people in the office from 9 to 5. So they wanted people literally for those hours. And so the people who were working long hours were suddenly incentivized to only work those hours. And
Hmm.
the people who weren't working all of those hours were still not more productive during those times. So it's there's you can see the impetus behind these policies. You can see why it started. So let's talk a little bit about those first, like the reasons that we end up creating policies and why they end up going awry. Because there's good reason. You can see why people they think they want more productivity, so they're gonna like
Hmm.
demand more time in the office. The thing is, that's not incentivizing people to work more in the office. People being in their chairs doesn't mean they're working.
Yeah.
It never did, and it never
Still
will.
doesn't.
You're not actually incentivized to do that work. So we need to think about what we're really trying to incentivize and what the human response to that is. 'Cause it's easy
Yeah.
to throw out these policies. It's easy to throw out 5 sick days because it sounds right. And
Yeah.
it's easy for that to immediately become, okay, so since I want more vacation time and I didn't get sick this year, I'm going to
Yes.
use 3 sick days on the end of this vacation.
Yeah.
I'm very ill on the beach in Barbados right now, so I will happen to be
Got
ill
food
for the last three
poisoning.
days of this.
Yes. Oh, it's so true. And actually, it ties to an article we both read at the beginning of the week, which was actually about measures and how I was talking about something that we're very passionate about. And we actually had a podcast on like a measure is not a target.
Mhm.
And this is the same thing. Like the incentive is not the target. If you incentivize people to come to the office or take, only a number of sick days, they're gonna find a way to do that. So what are you actually after? Would you
Mhm.
want to what do you want to see happening?
I would hazard a guess that most of the time, what we are really looking for is people who would use that in an earnest way, who
Mhm.
aren't going to abuse the system, but know that they are they have the flexibility to do things like take time off and have some sick
Yes.
days. We want people who we can trust to do that. The interesting thing about putting a policy on that is it breeds some level of mistrust, and because
Yes. Yeah.
the corporate culture can be so it's very similar to like the legal structures, at least in America. Like they don't tend to matter. The things like contracts, things like laws, they don't matter until they're broken, and then you can really dig into the nitty gritty and the line by line details. And so people might understand that this is mostly a kind of follow the spirit of the law type of thing, where it's
Mhm.
yeah, you're generally 5 sick days. Nobody's going to get too mad if you end up having 7 in a year or whatever. People might understand that overall, but if you end up in hot water, or you have a frustrating manager, or you have some other politics that are being played, and suddenly that's now used against you, everybody's really reticent to misuse a policy because it
Mhm.
can be then evaluated as like, oh, look at these times you didn't follow the rules, even though
Yes.
maybe at the time that was just it felt like that was the spirit of it, and nobody was upset that you used more sick days because everybody understands you happened to get COVID that year or something, whatever
Yeah.
it is. It makes people really worried not to follow these policies, while simultaneously that's why I think it ends up removing the trust, because you can't know when that's going to be used against you. So you think you have to try and follow the policy, but if the policy doesn't make sense, then you just get frustrated, and you're like,
Yes.
wait, why
Yes.
am I throwing sick days on the end of my vacation?
Yes. Yeah. Well, and it's very similar to just looking at a one-way policy, so or a one-way accountability to the policy. So for example, let's say you have sick days and you don't use any of them, or you have 5 in a year and you use 3. So there's no giving back. Typically, sick days are not given back, which means you lose the other 2. And then the next year you need 7 sick days, but the policy is 5. So you get punished potentially, depending on how the policy is enforced, and the human side of actually looking at things is you could potentially be in the losing of like I only allow, I'm only allowed 5 sick days because that will be imposed, but the the two that I didn't use last year don't count. So it has to be a two-way door. If we're, if the policy requires accountability on one end, then the accountability has to show up in the other on the other end as well. So whether it's an cumulative 6 days where if you only use three 1 year, you get two more the next year, but it can't be this one way of like, well, if you don't use them, then we take them away. But if you need more, then well, that's a no. I'm like, no.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a perfect way of describing it. It is down to the relationship of the employer. I mean, that is playing well to the social contract, not just the contract. So the
Yes.
social contract between employer and employee of assuming that there is a two-way door here. And for a long time, we've kind of treated this like the employers get to do whatever they want to employees. They could just like to designate these, and to some extent, that's true. They have the ability to fire people. They have the ability to take people out of companies. So it's always a bit of an unequal power structure. And given that, there's so many studies out there that are like, oh, the high performing teams have trust, high performing teams have trust. That's part of creating that trust, is having those two-way policies and showing that yes, we're giving these things, and we understand that this is what we're asking of you, and in return, here's what we're willing to give. Here's what we can do to help you
Yes.
get there. And
Exactly.
that builds that trust, builds that relationship. Obviously, it kind of happens on the person-to-person level when the manager is the one enforcing it, but that still comes from the company level, and it does breed trust or
Yeah.
lack of trust to the larger organization.
Yes.
And I can already feel in anybody who is listening and is worried about policies, the resistance and the holding on to things like, well, what happens when people start taking advantage of this? What happens? I said, okay, you can have as many sick days as you want, and now suddenly I have employees who are gone for months at a time.
Mhm.
First of all, would be shocked if somebody is out
Yeah.
there doing that.
Yeah.
It's usually not what people, and if it is, that's probably a different culture issue or a different
Yes.
specific personality issue.
Yes.
So
Yes.
first off, you've hired the wrong people, or you've created a
Yeah.
vast system of mistrust that people really want to
Yeah.
abuse because they don't feel
Hmm.
listened to, or they feel very taken advantage of, and so they're happy to take advantage in return.
Yeah.
So that's first
And
off.
yes. Well, and it goes with the unlimited PTO policies, as that has become a norm in a lot of places. It's that kind of worry, or like, well, if I do unlimited PTO, then somebody's going to be gone for 3 months at a time. And I'm like, well, again, it goes back to the problem is not that they're taking advantage of the unlimited PTO policy. The problem is that the culture is either too miserable for them to want to work, or you hire the wrong person that doesn't want to work or doesn't feel like they're providing value, or whatever the reason is for taking the time off. It becomes something that's a necessity. That's when you have the FMLA, the leave conversations, and whatever other policies you can impose. And the funny thing is that if you look at the data shows that in companies where you have unlimited PTO, people actually take less PTO than in companies where they have a certain number of PTO days.
And you can see how that happens. We've been part of a few companies, and usually the policy is you can take all the time off you want, just make sure your work is covered. Which, given the infinite scope and wheel of work, and the fact that we tend to burn down to the minimum staff possible to do anything,
Yes.
it's really hard to often get that work covered,
Yes.
to have that available, or to feel like you're not leaving people in a lurch, which people tend to not want to do. So you end up not taking that PTO, or you
Yes.
feel like culturally people aren't taking that PTO, so I don't know if I can. And
Yes.
that doesn't send a great message either, because then what are you saying to your people? Like if people aren't taking advantage of that, or they can't, or they get guilt when they do, then you end up with this. It again violates that two-way door, because it's saying that you can take as much as you want, but the second you do that, then there's other, little
Yes.
pushback or whatever, or the reasons that you don't feel like you can take that. So I get why people set these policies. I get that people are worried about it being taken advantage of, but it really, that trust, if that trust has already been violated, yeah, I guess you would have to
Hmm.
rule much more by an iron fist, and you're still going to burn everybody out. Like, there's still a
Yeah.
very short-term play in that. You might be able to do that for some amount of time
Yeah.
until other companies can offer a better system of trust that they can go jump to.
Yes. Yeah. It's also amazing because if you actually have that trust and relationship with the employees, you don't even need to count how many days off they take. You just know. You know whether they're showing up and being fully productive when they're there. And it's not even a thing. Like I remember one of the people that was working in our teams in the past has recently, once we moved on, has recently said like, oh God, like I kind of feel bad because I on the team I was the one that took the most PTO and you kept encouraging me to take more. And I realized like, oh, I first of all, I never felt like you weren't here and producing, and I probably encouraged more because it felt like you were doing so much work and providing so much value that I was hoping we were taking breaks. But
Hmm.
I never actually sat down and counted how many days of PTO you took versus somebody else on the team. It just the feeling of providing value was very equal. And sometimes it was to the point of like, please take time off.
Yes. And that is a perfect example of what the balance looks like and what the intention is. Right? The intention of an unlimited PTO policy is that people should have the flexibility. Well, in my perfect world, in a policy I would design, the intention would be to let people have all of the time that they possibly can have. Like you should have all that time to have life to be able to do these things with the understanding that, obviously you've been hired to do a job. We need that accomplished at some level. It needs to be at least run smoothly. If you can find ways to do that, and to your point, it doesn't even feel like that person's gone because they've done enough. They've got to make sure they're covering their bases when they're gone.
Hmm.
And nobody's feeling burnt out by that. Everybody's happy to do that coverage, live in that
Yeah.
hole. Then there's no reason not to take as much of that as possible and to continue to encourage that. So what you really want is people to provide that value, and that will be
Yes.
maximized, as we all know, by having time away as well. So it's good to have that
Yes.
time off. And what you really want is the good value to come out of that. So when we think about designing policies, really think about what the outcome we're looking for is.
Hmm.
It's not, oh, we want to make sure that we are competitive in the market with how many vacation days we're
Hmm.
we're offering or what that looks like. Uh, yeah, maybe I guess to some extent you don't want people to immediately be like, wow, I get 2 days off a year, but anywhere else I would get 3 weeks. I'm out of here. Like, yes, I guess you should look around a little bit. But again, what are the behaviors you're really looking for? And what do you really want from this? If you want people to be in the office, what are you looking for from that? How can you encourage that? How can you make sure that's happening when people are there? How can
Yeah.
you make sure that it's flexible enough that for the edge cases of, oh, I have a doctor's appointment, like that's still
Hmm.
okay. That people don't feel like, oh, I've been told there's a really strict be in the office these days policy and I can't take this appointment. How do you
Yeah.
make sure that you have that balance? And I think the key is really just thinking about it from what you really actually want and building the trust enough to allow that to happen. And if it's people are taking advantage of that, knowing what the accountability structures are to reinforce, like, okay, yeah, you're abusing this policy. Like we
Yes.
don't feel like we're getting the fair
Yeah.
agreement out of this. So trying to rule by that, like, what's the spirit of this? And if somebody does that, be transparent about it, not only to them, but to
Yeah.
everybody else so that they don't feel like this is just randomly punishing and, oh, I don't know where the
Yes.
line is on
Yeah.
unlimited PTO or something. Make sure that people know, like, yes, this person, we have unlimited PTO. It's
Yeah.
not like this person was wrong for taking those days, but we have so little coverage now. We're being hurt as
Yes.
a company and everything that we're trying to do. So we are now violating the second clause in this where it's no longer supporting the mission and we can't keep going forward.
Yeah. Indeed. And it's not to say that there's a potential for abusing an unlimited PTO policy. There is the potential for that. Hopefully, most people show up with accountability, self-accountability, and self-responsibility, and don't do that. And again, like dig deeper on why that may be happening when it is happening, and have those conversations. So I think that's also a big piece. It's when there is lack of value being provided, lack of productivity being provided, and then have the conversation like figure out like what is going on and and then and adjust as needed. Maybe this isn't the right type of, if this is a culture where it's that the work is needed all the time and there is no flexibility because it has a huge impact, then maybe it is the wrong environment for somebody who needs more flexibility in when they can show up and when they necessarily don't need to necessarily show up as productive. But those are all conversations. That's where it becomes a human thing, not just a this is the policy on paper thing. We all drive in speed at some point, but we know we're not supposed to. And that's not the rule. So where's that flexibility?
At some point, yes.
At
I don't
some
think I've
point.
ever not sped.
The 10 miles over, that's acceptable.
Yeah, at least. Uh, that's exactly it. I remember at one point, and I was either a coach or a therapist at some point, talks about boundaries, and boundaries aren't just what you won't do, but the circumstances under which you will or won't do something. I'm able to give this much time or this much type of time for under these circumstances and not these circumstances. So getting a little bit more nuanced with it and allowing for those edge cases and understanding where those lines are and being able to articulate that and then have that conversation with somebody when boundaries are violated. And like having a boundary or like setting up a rule or any kind of policy, there's going to be things you didn't predict, and that doesn't mean you can't adjust and change those things to try and help clarify over time. But again, it's all conversations and being very upfront about why things are changing instead of feeling like there's just very off the cuff or broad strokes. This applies to everybody, and we're going to totally ignore all the edge cases and
Yeah.
good luck fitting your life
Yeah.
into this. Those are the things that drive down morale, that make you feel untrusted, that stop the ability to keep people where you want them, keep the
Mhm.
behaviors you want to keep.
Yeah, indeed. There's also something else that has shifted quite dramatically, which is impacts the social contract between employers and employees and the policies, is the fact that now work follows us everywhere. We have computers at home. We have personal computers at home. We have smartphones that have everything or more than our personal computers do. And so that social contract of I only get paid for 40 hours a week if I'm in it exempt or non-exempt. I can't remember which one is it is the employee, and I don't get paid for working over. I only get 6 days a year. I only get certain number of PTOs. That's great, which really means when I get an email or a request at 5:01, I cannot be expected to actually answer it. So again, it can't be a one-way thing where like I get punished for working less or having a doctor's appointment or needing one more day of sick days a year. But then I also get taken advantage about the fact that I am reachable 24/7. And if I don't actually respond, that's the problem, that it
Yes.
doesn't work.
Yeah. Yeah, you can't demand both things. And I think that's again
Yes.
that two-way. And that's where
Yes.
people like people are worried about being taken advantage of on both ends of the on both sides of the spectrum.
Yes.
Like, we're very worried about being taken advantage of by our employers because there is a power dynamic mismatch. We're very worried
Yes.
about our employees taking advantage of our policies because we have some goal we want from them.
Yes.
But instead of approaching that as human to human, where hey, here's what we need and would like from our
Yeah.
employees versus here's what we're just going to demand, it's a very different conversation. It's a very
Yes.
different morale feel, and there's just a different respect on both sides. If you show that respect, you're likely to get that respect. And if you're not getting it, that might be more of a singular person issue
Yeah.
or some way that the policy is being announced that is really turning people off, rather than this is now we have to get even stricter on our policies.
Yes. Yes.
I remember early in my career, I was we were doing like daily stand-ups or something for some project, and it was at like 8:30 in the morning, which was already like a little bit early. But there was one employee who was consistently late, wasn't showing up to that 8:30, and so the choice by the manager was to turn this into 7 a.m. meetings, so that we all
Yes.
had to be there, and that was very discouraging for the
Yes.
80% of the team that showed up
Yeah.
at 8:30 and was able to do it, and then suddenly had to show up way earlier, change their entire personal schedule. Like people who had kids had to like change their
Yeah.
dropping off at school schedules. People who had to catch trains or whatever. Now it's a different train. It's a different time of day. You're waking up in the dark, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all for one employee. And that's the problem with trying to rule by exception and trying to
Mhm.
stamp out all the exceptions and put everything in firm black and white print. It doesn't leave enough flexibility for the ones who can accept the flexibility, who are
Yeah.
likely the ones driving a lot more value.
Yeah. Well, which again, like address the situation with the one individual. If everybody else is showing up and the one individual is not showing up, have that conversation. Is it going to be hard? Yes, it is going to be hard. Welcome to the world.
Hmm.
But it's one individual or two individuals, you address the problem with them. I had a similar actually experience where we were trying to figure out a daily stand up, or not even daily, but it was like 2 or 3 times a week. And because of our calendars being so booked, the suggestion was let's do it at 6:30 a.m., which is not ideal for anybody involved. And there was that, like, can we all, is this okay? Like, it was actually asked. It was like, do we all agree to 6:30 a.m.? And we all, said like, okay, fine. Like, we realize how much more difficult it is to do at other times. So let's give the flexibility to the team, because we all said yes, we all committed to that. Well, lo and behold, come to show up to this meeting, and the same individual wasn't showing up at all, weeks and weeks on end. And so then when we brought that up, I was like, why are we having this meeting? Is one crucial individual keeps not showing up, and I had the conversation with the individual, and I asked, like, what's going on? And he says, like, well, I said yes, but I never agreed that would work for me. I'm like, well, first of all, then say no.
That's not saying yes,
And
then is it?
that's not a yes. And second of all, from the manager in that coins, it's like, have the conversation with him. You notice he's not here. We all do. This is a team of 5.
Hmm.
This is not 50. It's
Yeah.
very clear that the same person is not showing up. So what kind of culture and morale does that show? And what kind of type of ethical behavior does that show? Address it. Let's not pretend that nobody notices that the same individual is not showing up every single day.
Oh, it's so common. It's so common. Ooh. I think that ultimately, if you want to go to design some human incentives, first of all, think about the behaviors you're really trying to encourage, and set those down as like, here's what we want to see people do. Then set down things like guidelines for like, here's situations where we might be wondering if this is really being followed. If you want to do the unlimited PTO example. Okay, we have unlimited PTO. That means you can take as many days as you want. Here's situations in which we'd be more concerned that people are taking advantage of that, or it's no longer in the spirit of we want to give people the flexibility to take off when they want to take off. Maybe it's now we're seeing projects struggle, or we're suddenly missing key components at crucial deadlines, or there's some gaps in knowledge that are being missed. And it's not like all of those can be covered all the time, but knowing how much that impact is, and starting to think about the dilemmas that you'll eventually face of, okay, now it seems like we're trying to decide whether this person is taking too much advantage of this policy, or whether it's really in the spirit of it. Those are the questions to ask yourself and try and lay down in the guidelines, and then assume you'll have to iteratively improve this. There's going to be things you miss. There's going to be things that you want to improve over time, and just allow that to be the case, that there's still that movement, that flexibility, and make that the social contract that, hey, yeah, what we're encouraging is we want people to be able to take whatever time they need to take for doctor's appointments, for et cetera. What we need for that to happen is very clear communication. What we need for this to happen,
Yes.
and here's examples of when that would be happening. Here's examples of when that would not be happening. We're
Yes.
not going to cover all the bases, but give them an idea. Give them the idea
Yes.
that this is the spirit of what we're trying to accomplish. We would like to trust you to make that happen in the spirit of it, not in the letter of
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly it. It's like, create those scenarios. Think of the possible scenarios, the human based scenarios, and figure out, how do we communicate the type of scenarios? And also, does the policy allow for those scenarios? Is it possible that somebody can take 1 hour, 2 hour off for a doctor's appointment and not have to take a whole, sick day or PTO day? Especially if that person is also going to be required or expected to work until 7 p.m. or 8 p.m. most nights, because that's when things need to happen, or because there's deadlines. So where's that flexibility? And also come up with those scenarios. Does the policy allow for completely normal and possible scenarios? And that can be part of that communication. It's like, here's some examples of scenarios and how we expect to show up in those scenarios.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to start thinking about, like, this is something that happens with change all the time, and change is really, at the end of the day, essentially some type of policy direction. You're trying
Mhm.
to say, hey, this is how we're going to do this. This is how we'd like this to work. If you're going to restructure how your organization is functioning, this is what we're trying to get out of it. Here's why that's important. Here's what we think that this will do for us. And once you know that, you also have a way better feedback on whether that's actually accomplishing what you're hoping it's accomplishing.
Mhm.
And everybody can try and make those on the ground decisions you couldn't possibly cover in a specific, one policy or one idea, that people can still make a decision towards the overall goal. So know the direction, know the intention, and let people get there, and hold accountable the people who are not following towards the intention that has been set.
Yeah, exactly. So remember, there's humans on the other side of the policy. There is a
Yes.
middle ground.
Yes. And we can all lower our stress levels a little bit if we can allow for that flexibility. And it
Yes.
is hard to allow for that flexibility if you're unwilling to have the hard conversations. So
Yes.
train yourself up, read crucial conversations, do
Yes.
some conflict resolution training, whatever
Yes.
it takes to help
Yeah.
yourself get into those, because that's going to pay
Yeah.
off so many dividends if that's what you're essentially avoiding is hard conversations.
Yes, exactly. So good luck.
Good luck.
Thanks for listening.